My wife betrayed me with our lawyer during our divorce and drained $150, $0 from our joint account, only for her to disappear with half the house. Now she's suing me for fraud over inheritance that I never even received. Hello everyone. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin the video. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons, with certain specifics modified to preserve anonymity. I never thought I'd be the guy to find out my wife was cheating on me, let alone with our lawyer during a divorce. Honestly, it felt like a bad joke at first. We'd been married for 10 years and everything seemed fine, or at least I thought it did. Lisa was always a little high maintenance, but I figured that was just her personality. She was bitchy sometimes, sure, but she was also charming and smart. We had a house, decent jobs, a sort of life I thought we both wanted. That is, until I started noticing subtle changes. Small things at first, her phone buzzing at odd hours, her being more secretive with her texts, but I brushed it off. I told myself she was just stressed with the divorce process, which was ugly enough already. Then came the money. We had a joint account, and I noticed a strange withdrawal of $150, $0 about a month ago. I was confused because I knew we didn't have that kind of cash just sitting around. When I asked Lisa about it, she just shrugged and said it was an investment or some legal fees or some business deal she was working on. Her tone was dismissive and she looked away when I pressed her. That was weird because Lisa is usually pretty upfront, but I didn't have any concrete proof, so I let it go for a while. What really tipped me off was the sudden change in her behavior. She started acting jittery around me, avoiding eye contact, deleting messages on her phone faster than I could blink. I found her hiding the phone one night when she thought I was asleep. I peeked and saw a string of texts that made my stomach drop. It was from someone named Jake, and the messages weren't just friendly, they were flirty, explicit even. They talked about meeting up, about how she could wait to see him, how she'd been lying to me about everything. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My mind raced. I couldn't believe it. My wife, who'd always been so bitchy and manipulative, was actually cheating on me with our lawyer. The lawyer I trusted to handle our divorce. I stared at that screen for what felt like forever, trying to process what I'd just seen. I couldn't believe I'd been blind to all of it. She'd been lying to me from the start, lying about the money, about her meetings, about her feelings. I felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. How could she do this? After everything we'd been through, I was furious at myself for not catching on sooner. I felt stupid, gullible even, but mostly I was hurt. Deep down, I'd always thought she loved me, and now I realized she'd been planning her escape with someone who was supposed to help us. The next day, I decided I couldn't just sit around and pretend I didn't know. I needed to confront her, but I also needed a plan. I knew Lisa, she was a master manipulator. She would lie her way out of anything. So I started gathering evidence. I printed out those texts, saved her deleted messages, took screenshots of the bank statements showing the $150K withdrawal. I wanted proof, concrete proof, before I said a word. I also hired a private investigator, something I never thought I'd do, and found out that she'd been meeting Jake at some fancy hotel downtown. It was all real. She was cheating, draining our savings, and planning her escape. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, but I knew I couldn't stay silent. The betrayal cut so deep I felt like I was drowning. How had I missed all the signs? How had she managed to lie to me for so long? It was like waking up from a nightmare. I felt numb, yet furious. I thought about all the times I'd trusted her, built a life with her, only for her to throw it all away for some guy. I wondered if she ever loved me at all, or if I was just another pawn in her game. I kept replaying everything, trying to find answers, trying to understand how someone I loved could do this to me. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not without a fight. I was going to confront her, get my answers, and figure out how to take back what was mine. The house, my dignity, everything she'd stolen from me, she'd pay for every bit of this. I just needed to be smart about it. I had enough evidence now. I was ready to face her. When she walked through that door tonight, I knew it was going to change everything. And I was prepared to do whatever it took to make her regret betraying me. That night I waited in the living room, feeling like I was sitting on a ticking time bomb. My heart was pounding and my hands were trembling. I kept replaying everything I'd uncovered, her texts, the bank statements, the hotel photos. I had them all printed out and ready. I knew she was coming home late. She always did when she was trying to avoid me after she'd been out with Jake. I wasn't planning to give her a chance to deny or spin her way out of it. When she finally stepped through the door, I could see the flicker of guilt in her eyes, but she tried to play it cool. "Hey, babe," she said, trying to sound casual, slipping off her shoes. "What's going on?" I didn't waste time. I pulled out the printed evidence and laid it all out on the coffee table. Her face instantly drained of color. Her eyes darted around, trying to find a way out. She stammered, "What is this? You're crazy. You must be mistaken." "No, Lisa," I said, voice cold and steady. "I know exactly what you've been doing. The texts, the money, the hotel, everything. How long has this been going on?" She tried to deny it, of course. She told me I was paranoid, that I was imagining things, that she loved me and would never cheat. But I wasn't buying it. I'd seen enough. I told her I knew about Jake, about the money she drained from our account, about how she's been lying to me from the start. Her face twisted into a sneer, and she started with the usual bullshit, saying I was overreacting, that I was jealous and insecure, that I didn't trust her. But I wasn't listening anymore. I'd reached my limit, that's when her tone shifted. She got bitchy, started throwing accusations back at me, saying I was controlling, that I never understood her, that I was just a boring old husband who couldn't satisfy her anymore. She said she needed excitement and I was just in her way. I felt like I'd been punched again. How could she be so cold, so manipulative? I'd always known she had a bitchy streak, but this was something else. She didn't even try to deny the affair anymore. She just doubled down on the insults. I felt a surge of anger I'd never experienced before. I told her she was a liar, a cheat, and a thief. I told her I wanted her out of the house and that I was filing for divorce first thing in the morning. She laughed, mocked me, saying I didn't have the guts, that she'd win in court, and that I'd never get her to leave. That's when I realized she was planning to take everything, our house, the money, whatever she could get. She was trying to make me look bad, turn the tables, and that made me even angrier. I knew I had to act fast. I called my lawyer that night and told him everything. We agreed to get a temporary restraining order, secure the house, and freeze her access to the accounts. I also told him to prepare for her to try and claim some inheritance I never even received, another lie she was spinning to try and save her ass. She'd been lying about everything, and I was finally seeing through her bullshit. It was a huge shock, but also a relief. I finally had proof, and I finally knew the truth. I felt numb, honestly. Part of me was devastated. I loved her once, or at least I thought I did. But another part was furious, furious that she'd betrayed me, drained our savings, and now was trying to screw me over in court. The betrayal was so deep I didn't recognize myself anymore. I trusted her to be honest, to be loyal, to be my partner. Instead, she'd been sneaking around, lying, cheating, and draining us dry. I kept asking myself, how did I get here? How did I not see the signs? That night, I stayed up all night thinking about what I needed to do next. I knew I couldn't let her get away with it. I had to protect myself, my money, my house, my reputation. I had to fight for what was mine, even if it meant destroying everything I once believed in. I was angry, so angry I could taste it, and I knew that from now on my life would never be the same. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, had turned into someone I barely recognized, and I was ready to make her pay for it. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My mind was racing, trying to piece everything together, figure out what my next move should be. I knew I couldn't just sit around and wait for her to spin her lies or manipulate her way out of this mess. I had evidence now, more than enough, and I was going to use it. I called my lawyer first thing, told him everything again, and asked him to expedite the paperwork for the restraining order and to start preparing for the divorce. While waiting for the legal stuff to process, I decided I needed to confront her face to face. I didn't trust her to tell the truth, especially after how she'd lied so convincingly last night. I also wanted to see her reaction, see if she'd try to deny everything again or if she'd crack under pressure. So I sent her a message, telling her I wanted to talk, that I knew everything and that she needed to come home so we could discuss it. I knew she'd try to stall, but I didn't care. I wanted to be there when she did. When she finally arrived, she looked different, more nervous than I'd ever seen her. Her bitchy attitude was still there, but it was tinged with guilt. She avoided eye contact, kept fidgeting, and kept trying to brush past me. I blocked her path and told her it was over, that I knew she'd been cheating, draining our bank account, and lying about everything. I pulled out the evidence, screenshots, bank statements, hotel receipts, and slammed them onto the table. Her eyes widened, and for a second I saw her panic. She tried to play innocent, saying I was crazy, that I was just overreacting, that it was all a misunderstanding. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're just jealous because I'm more successful than you. Jake and I are just having fun. You're insecure." I was furious. I told her that her lies didn't work anymore, that I had enough proof to take her to court, to throw her out of the house, and to cut her off financially. She snapped. Her bitchy mask slipped, and she started screaming at me, calling me controlling and paranoid. She told me I was a terrible husband, that I never understood her, and that she'd never loved me, only used me for money. That was the moment I realized how deep her manipulation went. She'd always been good at twisting things around, making me doubt myself, making me feel guilty. But I wasn't buying it anymore. The emotional shock was overwhelming. I'd gone from trusting her to feeling like I'd been punched in the gut again and again. I felt betrayed, angry, exhausted, and honestly, a little lost. I'd built my life around her, and now I was watching it crumble. But part of me also felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, I was seeing the truth. She'd been lying all along, and I was finally free from her web of deception. After that confrontation, I told her she had to leave the house immediately. I had already arranged for movers to come that day, and I made sure the police were on standby in case she tried to cause a scene. I didn't want her to take anything else or do something reckless. She threw a fit, screaming about how she'd ruin me, how I'd never get her out of my life, but I didn't care anymore. I was done. I knew that whatever she tried, I had the evidence, I had the law, and I had my own dignity to protect. As she packed her things, I couldn't help feeling a mixture of relief and heartbreak. I still loved her, or at least I thought I did. But I couldn't ignore the fact that she'd betrayed me in the worst way possible. I kept thinking about the money, how she drained our savings, taken half the house, and was now trying to spin some story about inheritance she never even received. I wondered what her next move would be, how she'd try to manipulate the court or turn people against me. That day I learned a brutal lesson. Trust is fragile, and sometimes the person you love the most can turn out to be your biggest enemy. I was hurt, yes, but I also felt stronger than I had in years. I knew I'd have to rebuild, to start over, but at least now I knew the truth, and that was worth more than any house or money. I promised myself I wouldn't let her ruin me completely. I'd fight for what's mine, for my dignity, and for my future, and I'd never let someone betray me like that again. After Lisa left the house that afternoon, I sat alone in the living room, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The house suddenly felt too quiet, too big. I looked around at the empty spaces where her things used to be, and for a moment I wondered if I'd ever feel normal again. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The legal process was underway, and I was determined to fight for what was mine: my house, my money, my reputation. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to everything that had happened: her betrayal, the money, the lies. I kept asking myself how I'd missed all the signs, how I'd been so blind to her manipulations. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I'd been living in a kind of fog. I trusted her for so long, convinced that she loved me, that she was faithful. But all along she'd been plotting her escape, draining our joint account, and lying about her relationship with Jake. I knew I had to get my head straight. I contacted my lawyer again, discussed the next steps, and made sure everything was moving in my favor. I also decided to consult a financial advisor, someone who could help me recover as much of the money as possible and secure my assets. I was angry that she drained so much of our savings, but I was even angrier that she'd used me, lied to me, and manipulated me into thinking our marriage was still solid. That betrayal cut deeper than I could articulate. In the days that followed, I started to piece together what Lisa had been doing behind my back. I discovered she'd been talking to Jake for months, long before the divorce even started. She'd been planning her exit, plotting how to drain our accounts and how to take half the house. I also found out that she'd been lying about her inheritance. She never actually received it. That was just another lie she'd spun to make herself look better and to justify her actions. She'd been scheming, trying to cover her tracks, but I had enough evidence now to blow her lies apart. Meanwhile, I had to deal with the emotional fallout. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious. I kept replaying her words, her bitchy remarks, her accusations, her lies. I wondered how I'd ever trusted her, how I'd ever believed she loved me. The pain was raw, but a part of me also felt a strange sense of clarity. I'd been so focused on making our marriage work, on being the good husband, that I hadn't seen the signs she was slipping away. I'd been blind, and now I had to pick up the pieces. I started going to therapy to help process everything. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about understanding how someone I loved could turn into someone so different. I also began reaching out to friends and family, telling them what had happened. Their support was a lifeline. I realized I wasn't alone in this, and that I had people who believed in me and wanted me to move forward. One thing I knew for sure: I was done with her games. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I made a decision to stand my ground, fight for my rights, protect my assets, and rebuild my life from the ground up. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew I had to start with honesty, integrity, and a clear plan. I wanted to be stronger, smarter, and more cautious moving forward. The hardest part was accepting that I might never get her back, not in any real way. I had loved her once, or at least I thought I did, but now I saw her for what she truly was: a liar, a thief, and someone willing to destroy everything we built together just for her own selfish ends. That realization hit me hard, but it also gave me a kind of closure. I was finally seeing the truth, and that meant I could start to heal. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to come out of this stronger, more cautious, and more aware of what real trust means. As I sat alone that night, I made a vow to myself. No matter what, I wouldn't let her or anyone else define me by this betrayal. I would rebuild my life, piece by piece, and I would learn from this nightmare. Because if there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that sometimes the biggest betrayals come from the people you trust the most. And when they do, you have to pick yourself up, fight back, and never let them see you fall. A few weeks into this chaos, I finally started to feel like I was gaining some control again. The legal process moved faster than I expected. My lawyer managed to get the temporary restraining order approved, which kept Lisa from coming near the house or accessing our bank accounts. That was a relief. At least I didn't have to worry about her trying to siphon off more of what was left. But I knew this was only the beginning. The court case was looming, and I had to prepare myself for more lies, more manipulation. Meanwhile, I began the difficult task of rebuilding my finances. I hired a forensic accountant to trace all the money she'd drained, and what I learned made me even more furious. That $150, $0 she took, it was gone, spent on who knows what, probably on Jake and some luxury lifestyle she was trying to hide. She also transferred some of it into secret accounts she'd opened. I felt sick thinking about how she'd used my trust, my hard-earned savings, just to run off with her lover. It was like she'd stolen my future, my stability, all with a smile on her face. I also started going through our house, clearing out her stuff. It was a strange feeling seeing her belongings, knowing she'd betrayed me and wanted to take half the house. I was angry that she thought she could just walk away with everything, but I was also determined not to let her win. I put a lock on her side of the closet, changed the security codes, and made sure she couldn't come back and take what she wanted. It was a small victory, but it felt good to regain some control. The emotional toll was still there, though. I kept questioning myself. How did I not see this coming? Why did I trust her so blindly? I replayed every argument, every sign I'd missed. The worst part was realizing how much I'd sacrificed for her, how much I'd ignored because I loved her. But I also started to see her for what she really was, a manipulative, selfish person who'd used me, drained me, and then threw me away. That realization was bitter, but it was also freeing. I didn't want to be blind anymore. As the court date approached, I prepared my statement. I gathered every piece of evidence, organized my finances, and made sure I had witnesses willing to testify about her lies and her behavior. I knew Lisa would try to spin her story, paint herself as the victim, or claim she was entitled to more because of some fake inheritance she'd been pretending to have. But I was ready. I had the truth, and I was determined to fight for what was rightfully mine. One night I sat in the dark, reflecting on everything. I realized I'd been living in a kind of nightmare, but now I was waking up. I'd been naive, trusting her blindly, but I wasn't anymore. I'd learned the hard way that some people are capable of incredible betrayal, and you have to be prepared to stand up for yourself. I also understood that I needed to focus on healing, on moving forward, no matter how painful it was. The house, the money, those could be replaced, but my dignity, my peace of mind, those were more important. It was clear I couldn't undo her actions, but I could control how I responded. I decided I'd rebuild my life piece by piece. I'd get a new job, get counseling, and start trusting myself again. I'd also make sure she paid for what she'd done, through the court, through the loss of her lies, and through the fact that she'd lost someone who truly loved her. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. I'd learned that betrayal cuts deep, but resilience cuts even deeper. And I was determined to come out of this stronger, more cautious, more aware, and finally free from her web of lies. The court date finally arrived, and I was mentally prepared for the battle ahead. I knew Lisa would do everything she could to spin her story, to make herself look like the victim, but I had the evidence and I had the truth. Sitting in that courtroom, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and resolve. My lawyer presented everything: bank statements, text messages, hotel receipts, witness testimonies. Lisa's lies unraveled quickly, and her bitchy, manipulative facade crumbled under the weight of facts. She tried to claim she was entitled to the house because of some inheritance I supposedly received, something she kept pushing during her court filings. But the judge saw right through her lies. I had never received any inheritance. It was just another story she'd fabricated to justify her actions. When the judge finally ruled, it was clear I was awarded full custody of the house, the remaining savings, and a restraining order that kept Lisa away from everything. I felt a surge of relief, but also a deep weariness. After the court, I walked out into the sunlight, feeling like a weight had been lifted. I'd fought hard and I'd won. The betrayal still stung, but I was finally free from her manipulation. I knew she'd try to come back, to twist things again, but I was prepared. I'd learned how to spot her lies, how to protect myself, and how to trust again, slowly, carefully. In the months that followed, I started rebuilding my life. I got a new job, moved into a smaller apartment, and began focusing on myself. I went to therapy regularly, working through the emotional scars she'd left behind. I also reconnected with friends and family who supported me through this nightmare. The house felt different now, less like a symbol of betrayal and more like a fresh start. I made it clear to everyone that I was done with her games, done being the victim, and ready to move on. Looking back, I realize I learned some harsh lessons. Trust is fragile, and sometimes the people closest to you can betray you in the worst ways. But I also learned that resilience is stronger. No matter how deep the betrayal, you can come out the other side if you're willing to fight for yourself. I don't regret standing up for what's right. I don't regret uncovering the truth. And I certainly don't regret finally putting an end to the nightmare that was my marriage. Now, I focus on rebuilding my life, not just financially, but emotionally and mentally. I still get angry sometimes. How could she do this? How could she lie for so long? But I remind myself that I'm better off without her, that I deserve honesty and respect. She's out of my life now, and I'm finally at peace. I've learned that sometimes the greatest victory is simply surviving and reclaiming your dignity. And that, in the end, is what matters most.